Please welcome to the stage Isaac Childres, designer of Gloomhaven and owner of Cephalofair Games.
Hello. Welcome to PAX. And, welcome to Storytime. I'll be your storyteller today. And I thought I'd just spend our time together here talking a little bit about my early game design history, give you some anecdotes, show you some pictures of like early Gloomhaven development. So let's get started. Our story begins around 2012, 2013. I was working in my physics lab. Oop, that didn't work. Press the wrong button. There we go. That's me, 2012, working in the basement of my physics lab. And I was getting kind of burnt out in physics. This was sort of the tail end of my physics grad school career. And if I can tell you something about physics, this is not going to be a physics lecture, but the beginning of your physics education is really exciting. You're learning about like mechanics, how like physical objects interact with each other, and you get into like electromagnetism, which is really exciting. But like the bleeding edge of like physics knowledge is very overwhelming and complicated, and I wasn't into it anymore. Yeah, so around that time, around that time, some other things were happening in the world. Kickstarter was kind of blowing up at the time. There's some my physics research if you're at all interested in that. And yeah, there's this game called Dungeon Roll. I don't know if anybody remembers this game. 2013. It was the game itself was all right, but what was really great was the Kickstarter that they ran for it. Tasty Minstrel really just innovated the idea of like stretch goals and getting the whole community like really excited about getting other players to come in and back this game. And other things. There was Jamie Stegmaier, Stonemaier Games, putting out these just amazing, like beautiful products, and really just like honing in on really utilizing the marketing of Kickstarter to sell his product and do really well at that. And so that was sort of interesting as just a bystander. You see these things and you're like, oh, like one person, one guy, like did all this. Like he figured all this out and made these games, and it's interesting. It could be like an interesting challenge that maybe one day, if I come up with a game, maybe I'll try that too. It wasn't like, oh, I got to go out and like get in on this and get some money here, but it was, just like that could be an interesting hobby, an interesting challenge for me. Around that time, I also started going to a weekly board game group. I'd always been really into board games, but it was kind of playing the same like 5 or 6 games over and over, like Puerto Rico and Agricola. But this group had a lot of these guys who just kind of like were always buying new games. And so every week I'd go there and I'd get to play like 2 or 3 new games, and it was just like a lot of like new, cool board game ideas kind of bombarding my brain and really started to get me thinking. So it's sort of like happened naturally, like all these sort of ideas started coming in and coalescing, and I'd take like this idea from this game over here, which I really liked, and that idea over here, and kind of form it into like my ideal board game experience. And so this was Forge War. This was the first game I designed. And it was really like a lightning bolt moment. I still remember like I was sitting in this like boring physics meeting, and this idea just like came to me. It was like, oh, what if I did this and this and this? And it all worked together, and I just started like frantically writing out notes on this piece of paper, went home, and like within a week, like I had this prototype built, just kind of pulling random artwork off the internet and throwing them on cards, doing my own like graphic design and everything. And you can kind of see some of my initial graphic design here. Embarrassing use of papyrus. I was not a graphic designer, but I made it work. So, the initial playtest of this game probably took like 8 hours, and it was miserable. But there was something there. There was something there, and so I kept working at it. And this was like a year and a half of just like me kind of working on this as a hobby, playtesting it and showing it to my friends, whoever would look at it. Not a lot of people did, but I got some people to come in and look at this game and played it together and refined it over time. And yeah, it was going along. I'm thinking, yeah, maybe I could put this on Kickstarter. Maybe I could do this. I could actually get this published. Like, that would be super cool. And I started thinking about, oh, well, how would I actually, I have a game, but how do I, like, actually publish it and, like, ship it across the world to, like, everybody who orders it? That seems like a big problem. So I started doing some research and eventually found Jamie Stegmeier's Kickstarter lessons blog, which was just like monumentally helpful to me, sort of, just hundreds of posts about like everything you need to do like before and during and after Kickstarter, and really showed me like everything that I still needed to do to actually get this on Kickstarter and have it be successful. Let's see here. So here's an early prototype with actual artwork that I made, but I was still using my own graphic design. I was kind of like stubbornly being like, I can do the graphic design myself. Like, you just put some icons on cards, it's all fine. But Jamie Stegmeier was the one who, convinced me through his blog posts that, like, no, you need to hire a real graphic designer and actually make the game. In addition to all the other stuff about like logistics and it's all very helpful. So eventually, we got there. Like, it took another like 6 months longer than I expected to get everything in line, but around like middle of 2014, like, we did get it up on Kickstarter, and it did way better than I expected, largely thanks to Richard Ham of Rahdo Runs Through. So I still remember, I sent him an early prototype of the game, and I remember like the night before the Kickstarter launched, and he had sent me his YouTube videos that he was going to post the next day when the Kickstarter launched, and I'm sitting there like watching them with my wife, sort of just like checking to make sure that all his information is correct. And he just starts like raving about this game, like, this is the best game of the year, this is so good, like everything I love about games is like right here. And it was just like one of those defining moments of your life where it's just like a magical experience of like realizing that what you did, like what you created, was actually good, and that people actually loved it. And not only that, it was like the night before the Kickstarter launched. You could not be more nervous about like, is this actually going to succeed? Like, there's probably a 50-50 on whether it's actually even funds. Like seeing that video and seeing that like the last 2 years of work that you put into this, it was going to be successful. It was gonna make it, and so that was a magical feeling. And yeah, we raised over $100,000 on that Kickstarter, and and then we actually had to make the game. So all that came, and I was able to do all that work. But at the same time, you start thinking, well, like, what's next? I made this game. It was successful. Obviously, like, I had other ideas for board games, so I wanted to keep working. I wanted to keep doing this as a hobby. And there were a lot of prototypes that were kind of spinning around in my head at the time. But there were really two games that I kind of like eventually honed in on after Forge War that I thought were worth pursuing. The first of those was a game I was calling Legend, and this game was really based on the concept of making skill checks, like in D&D or something, but using a deck of cards rather than a die. So I was really obsessed with this idea of like using cards as a method of random, resolution of randomness in a more dynamic way, right? Because like you roll a d20 or whatever, it's like a flat distribution, and it's not really super interesting. You either succeed or fail. But if you use a deck of cards, and you can think of a card as like almost like a coin flip. And so you flip over like 6 cards, it's like 6 coin flips, it becomes more of like a binomial distribution, which is just a more interesting set of profitability. But also there's so many more ways that you can modify that, right? You can pull cards in and out, you can add to cards or subtract cards. There's just like a lot more dynamic things you can do with a deck of cards rather than a die. And probably realize that a lot of these concepts eventually made it into Gloomhaven and like the attack modifier deck. But this is really the first iteration of that. And so my big brain idea for this was that I developed this game where you're kind of this, you're sort of this adventurer, like running around the countryside, sort of performing deeds to like build up your notoriety and fame. But my big idea was that if I really wanted to like, sort of catapult my career as a board game designer, what I should do is like get like some big IP to attach this game to, and then there's already like a built-in audience there. I could just, make this game and it would be successful just based on that IP, right? And this is somebody like not knowing anything about how to actually like acquire IP or having any sort of clout to have any influence with these big companies that own these IPs. So the IP I was looking at that I was super interested was Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicles. The Name of the Wind was like my favorite book at the time, and I just thought like it fit perfectly within that theme of just like running around the countryside and doing all these deeds. So I spent a lot of time trying to get their attention. You will not be surprised to learn that they never actually did get back to me, and this game never got published. I would still like to publish it at some point. I have my own IP now, so I don't really need them. It's all good. So this is a prototype of that. If you're a fan of the books, you might recognize this map of the worlds of Temerant. But yeah, and it's obviously like a deck building game. Like it's solely focused on this deck of cards that you sort of do skill checks with, and so there's got a big card offer there on the side as well. But anyway, so that was Legend, and definitely had some influence on Gloomhaven as well. But then the other game I was working on was called Dungeon Hunters. And so this was a tactical combat game, and this is kind of in response to a lot of tactical combat games I was playing at the time, and I was like super interested in that genre, despite like being more interested in like sort of Euro games and designing mostly Euro games up to that point. I started playing like Descent and like Mice and Mystics with my wife, and it was just like it's a really exciting genre. It had some flaws, but I wanted to try to fix that with my own game. And so this was a squad-based tactical combat game where each player had a group of characters, and each character had like 2 actions per round. And you also had like a deck of cards, and so you could play like 1 card per round as well. And you can kind of see some of the influences of Gloomhaven here. This is like a list of the clans that I created for the game. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you look at like the Iron Claw clan. It's a diminutive clan of humanoids, and they're a large, angry bear god. It might be familiar to people who've played the Wild Fury. There's a Bannerheart clan, where you've got like a group of people who kind of get into specific configurations to give themselves bonuses, very similar to the Banner Spear in Frosthaven. So there's a lot of influences there. Let's see. These are some of the cards early prototype cards that I designed. You can see some formations from the Banner Hearts, and like also this idea of like persistent abilities where you put it down and you like resolve it over time. So the thing that kind of hung me up on this game was I really hated like dice chucking in these other tactical dungeon crawl games that I played. And I was resolved to like have no randomness in this game. Like there's no dice, there's no cards, like nothing. So it was all just deterministic. But like, how do you make that exciting? How do you make that interesting when you know the outcome of all your actions? And my solution was just to make it like super complicated. So, right? I mean, if you don't understand all the different mechanics that are going on, then it'll still be a surprise to you how much damage you do. So I had like 50 different like keywords that were kind of attached to like the different characters and all the abilities. And I would run playtests of this where I was at the table And I had all the information in my head, so when my playtester went to attack something, I'd be like, okay, that and that and that and that and that. And that. Okay, you do four damage. And they're like, okay, I do 4 damage, right? It was great for them. They had a lot of fun because they didn't have to do all the thinking. And yeah, I never did blind playtesting on this, but I imagine it would have gone very poorly because like nobody would have understood how to resolve that. So I understood that was a problem, and eventually kind of like fell off this design for a while. But there were some other game design ideas I was kind of playing around with at the time as well, in response to dungeon crawls. And so one of the other things that really grated me about dungeon crawls was this concept of like most of the time in the game, you're just like moving and attacking and like rolling some dice, and then you move and attack. And you look at a game like Descent, Second Edition, where you have like the special ability, your heroic feat, but you only get to do that like once per scenario. So like once per scenario, you get to do like something really cool that's like really exciting, and then the other 2 hours of the scenario, you're just like moving and attacking, moving and attacking. So I was like, why can't we take that fun, exciting part and make that the entire game? Why can't all of your abilities be special abilities? And so yeah, I really wanted to like start thinking about that. And then the other idea that I was sort of playing around with at the time was multi-use cards. So there's a lot of multi-use cards out there. Played like Glory to Rome and all that sort of stuff. But weirdly, like the one game that kind of stuck in my brain more than everything else was this game called Rocket Wreckers, which is not a published game. It was made by Rob Couch. And it was on the web series Tabletop Deathmatch, which was something that Cards Against Humanity did, where they like brought in like 10 or so like amateur game designers and had them pitch at Gen Con to like a panel of judges, and they picked a winner and all that, and it was all filmed. And so this game was one of those. And the concept of this game was like a 1v1 two-player game where you had 2 characters like on a rocket, and the rocket was like going to like blow up something, and one person was trying to get it there, and the other person was trying to crash the rocket by like crashing it into the ground. And you had these cards where each card had an action on it and then a distance. And you would play 2 cards together, and you'd play one for the action and one for the distance. And so you'd have like really good cards that had high distance because you wanted to get the rocket to where you wanted it to go, but then that might also have like a really good action on it. So you had to decide whether you wanted to do it for the good action or the good distance. So it's a really interesting concept to me. It sort of opened up an interesting decision space. I didn't really think about it too much, but it sort of got stuck somewhere in the back of my brain. And then I went to a game design meetup where I was playtesting this other guy's game that was about crowd surfing, where you had like a group of people that were like trying to like surf through the crowd and get up on stage. And he was trying to figure out like the best way to sort of resolve that sort of movement through cards. And it might have been because we were talking specifically about like distance, but like that pulled that memory out of the back of my brain. Like, what about Rocket Wreckers? Like, what if you had like 2 different cards, and maybe like you had like played one for distance and one for direction, and so you could kind of move these guys around the board. It's just like how ideas work, right? The more you talk about them, the more you think about them, like the more they get cemented in your brain. So you go home and you start thinking about like, well, could I use that mechanic myself? Like in a dungeon crawl, like what are the 2 things that you want to do? You want to move and you want to attack, right? So like what if we had dual-use cards where half the card was an attack action and half the card was a move action? You played 2 together and did a move and attack, and it's amazing. And then like all your abilities are special abilities because they're all based on the cards in your deck, and like it all just kind of like came together in like this amazing way that just kind of like exploded out of my brain as Gloomhaven. So that's kind of how it started, where I took the sort of the base that I was working with in Dungeon Hunters, and the actual like action resolution of that game didn't really work out very well. And then I had found this kernel of this idea of how to resolve actions in a very interesting and meaningful way. So again, just like with Forge War, I sat down and just started making out a prototype. This is one of my first prototypes using Mage Knight figurines for the characters and little meeples for all the bandits. Yeah, so I made 4 characters: the brute, the tinker, the spellweaver, and the scoundrel, and just started figuring it out. Just started playing. And unlike Forge War, where the first playtests were like a miserable experience, like this was like fun out of the gate. Like there were problems, of course, but like I had a great time playing it. I showed it to people, and they loved it. And so like I knew I had something special here. You can see here, this is my first draft of the brute cards. And maybe it hadn't fully like set in with me that like every card should be a special ability. You can see like 3 of his cards are just like attack 3, move 3. And then also, I don't know what's going on with that attack 5 loss with a move 1 on the bottom. Like, I don't know what I was thinking there, but but you had to start somewhere. So that's what I did, and just kept working on it, kept refining it, and yeah, let's see. So around this time, this was like the end of 2014. I was also finally graduating from grad school. So here's me with my PhD. Actually, I did finish grad school. I never used the PhD, but I have it. And this was really like a crossroads in my life, right? Because I could take my PhD, I could go out, I could get a job, probably not in academia because that's soul crushing, but there's jobs in the industry that I could get, and make a good income, support my family, like live a nice, normal life. Or I could make board games, right? I mean, it never really felt like this could be an actual career to me, like early on in the hobby. Like I was never intending like Forge War to like turn into a job. It was just like a hobby, to a challenge to like see if I could make it work. But Forge War was more successful than I thought it was, and I had these other good ideas that I thought could also be successful. And so I thought, what if I took a year off, right? What if I just waited a year to get a real job? And I was lucky enough to be at a point in my life where I was financially able to do that. Like my wife had a good job, we didn't have any kids, and it was viable to just like spend a year to see if this works. And so that's what I did. I also had to decide like whether I wanted to keep working on this King Killer game, which at that point I realized like I was never going to get the IP for. So it was just going to have to be my own theming, which was less exciting to me, or work on this hot new thing I was thinking about, this big dungeon crawl game. And so that is what I did. Here's a picture of me playing D&D in somebody's basement. So yeah, I knew that this was going to be like a big thing, or this was going to take a lot of work, right? Creating like this epic campaign game. But I had a lot of experience with that, like crafting campaigns, being a DM in many D&D campaigns, and so sorry. The question was like, how can I like make a box full of stuff that sort of replaces a dungeon master in like a big epic campaign game. It's a huge like monumental task, because I didn't want anybody to have to like take on that role at the table. I didn't want somebody to have to like run all the monsters themselves and sort of make those decisions. So it all had to be fully automated, but I also had to like put the story into the game itself, like and put the campaign, or sorry, like the the world building and all of that. So yeah, the first part of that was sort of building that foundation of like, what is this world? Who are these people? And so this is one of my first like world building documents, where I just started sitting down and thinking about like all the peoples who exist in this world, and how do they interact with each other? How do they sort of build up like the history of this world up to the point like where this campaign actually starts. This document is not very friendly to vermlings. I'm sorry about that. We eventually learned to give vermlings their due. but yeah, and the key thing here was like I wanted to do all this myself. Like I didn't want to have elves and dwarves and orcs and goblins and stuff like that. Like, why should I let J.R.R. Tolkien have all the fun? Like this was fun to me, like just creating these worlds, and so yeah, I wanted to put in the time and do that myself. So once that was completed, then sort of started to have to think about like, oh, I did take that slide out. Whoops. Sort of think about how to what is the actual story of the game, and it's interesting to me, like I was not like super like gung-ho on the actual story of the game, I guess is what I'm trying to say. What was more important to me was like the structure of the story rather than like the actual plot of like some like world-ending big bad boss at the end that you had to go and kill. What was interesting to me is creating a game where the player could just like start playing and just like kind of get lost in the world almost, just like live in that world and have like all these branching story paths, which is kind of like what the slide represents, and where you play a scenario and that unlocks 2 new scenarios, and you play one of those and it unlocks 2 more, and you just get like this feeling of just like this big open world that you can do whatever you want in. It's kind of like a West Marches approach almost. And so yeah, there's like a through line in there where yeah, there's some big bad boss at the end, but yeah, it wasn't as important to me as letting players like live in the world, because that's kind of what I wanted the theme of the game to be as well. Like you were mercenaries, like you didn't care about that big boss at the end. You just wanted to get some money, and you wanted to like complete your personal quest. And once you did that, you were out of there, and somebody else can handle that guy. It's all good. So if you want the player to experience this in this way, to have this feeling of just like, I could play this game forever. Right? I didn't actually even anticipate that people would finish this game. Right? Like, I just wanted them to play forever, as long as you want. And yeah, so like, but how do you do that? How do you capture that player's interest for for forever? That's kind of like the core problem in any game design ever in the world, right? Is you want players to play your game forever, and how do you capture their interest? So the main things I honed in on were just like a diversity of play, right? So having lots of different scenarios, lots of different monsters that you could encounter. So there's lots of different configurations of map tiles and monster types that you could and goals to each scenario. But then the other part of that was having a diversity of characters to play as. I don't know about your D&D campaigns, but in a lot of my D&D campaigns, you'd get tired of playing the same character over and over, and so you'd have the DM like kill off your character, or maybe they ride off to the sunset or whatever, and then you bring in a new character and play that. And I kind of wanted to capture that same idea in the board game as well, where there's kind of this idea of like forced retirement. Like at some point, you're going to get tired of playing that character, and it's totally cool to just like retire them, and like, but that action of retiring them unlocks something new and exciting that you can then pull out and play that instead, and have a whole new experience of playing the game. So really just focusing on those 2 ideas of just like diversity of play to make the game as replayable as possible. Another really interesting like game design concept I was playing around with at the time was this idea of like semi-cooperation, which I know is like a dirty word in some terms, or in some parts, but this was a fully cooperative game where your goal as a group was to complete each scenario to get through the campaign. But what's interesting about a campaign game is that you have like individual player progression, right? You carry over a lot of your progress from one scenario to the next, and you as an individual player can make more progress towards those individual goals than your other players. And it doesn't even have to be competitive necessarily in that sense, but like you've got experience and money that you can collect and your battle goals to achieve, and all these things where a lot of those encourage you to play suboptimally, right? Like you want to achieve your battle goal, you might have to do some things you don't necessarily want to do. You want to collect the loot on the ground, you're going to have to go over there and get it. Funny story, for a long time in the development of Gloomhaven, you did just collect all the money that was on the ground at the end of a scenario. You could collect it during the scenario if you wanted to, but at the end of the scenario, if it was still there, you just split it up evenly among the party. But the thing was that nobody went out of their way to get it. They're just like, oh yeah, we'll just split it evenly at the end. That's totally fine. We're all happy and friendly with each other. And it was only if you had one of those specific battle goals. It was like collect 6 coins. Did you actually go around and get it? And so people were too nice. And I wanted to encourage that sort of suboptimal play, and so I had to institute the rule that no, you don't get any money at the end of the scenario. You got to pick it up during the scenario. And there was a lot of pushback on that, but I'm like, trust me, this is the better way to play. This is the more interesting way to play. So that was fun to play around with as well. So development of this all was going along really well, but I was kind of on a timeline to actually see if this game would work, right? I gave myself a year, and so we needed to get this Kickstarter launched. And I knew probably September of 2015 was the latest I could launch it, because I think October there was a number of big Kickstarters that I just didn't want to compete with. Scythe was coming out in October of 2015. There's probably some cool Mini or Not project as well, and so it was definitely September, because November, December, those are no man's land in Kickstarter, so you definitely don't want to launch then. So we had to get stuff ready. I had to figure out all the logistics of fulfilling this game, but I also needed artwork. So I went on DeviantArt, which was a great source of artwork at the time, and sort of looked around different fantasy artists. I knew I didn't want to use the same artists as I used on Forge War. So I found Alexander Elichev, who just had some amazing artwork. He was working doing some Fantasy Flight projects at the time. But I messaged him. He was super keen on working with me. And I told him I didn't have Fantasy Flight levels of money, but I worked on his sort of lower pay scale, and we made it work. And he put out some amazing artwork for the game. I also needed graphic design. Obviously, I'm not going to do it myself this time. So Josh McDowell, who also did a lot of the graphic design on Forge War. He actually lived in the same city that I did, and he's just a graphic design wizard. He does amazing, beautiful work, and really brought out the best in Gloomhaven. There are also miniatures to make. That was where I was most shaky. I had no experience making miniatures and was very intimidated by that process. But I did have contacts in the industry now that had a little more clout, and so I eventually found James Van Schaik to do all the sculpting for me. And the interesting thing about James Van Schaik is he does all his sculpting by hand, which is very rare in the hobby, especially these days. So this is an early sculpt of the Brute. And these are very fragile things that he makes, and then he wraps them up and sends them to me. And then I took them to a mold making place that was an hour and a half drive from where I lived. And the really nerve-wracking thing about this mold making process, where they sort of make these pewter molds, or these pewter casts that I can then send to the factory in China to make their own molds, but because these fragile, brittle things, in the mold making process, it destroyed the miniature. So I would get them back after the molds were made, and it'd be in a plastic bag of just loose, broken pieces. So that was a little scary, but we did it. And then I had these pewter casts that I used for all my prototypes and stuff. So all of them got destroyed. Unfortunately, I don't really have any of them left except one little guy. So this is little Cragheart. He's a little guy. The thing is, when I was originally doing the world building for Gloomhaven, I envisioned the Savas as a 4.5 foot tall creature, and they're just little rock guys running around. And I didn't really communicate that to Alexander or James, sort of in the process of making the Elementalist, which was the first Savas class I designed. And it wasn't until Cragheart came along, which was kind of like the tail end of the Kickstarter. The Cragheart and the Mind Thief were added like at the end as stretch goals of like two additional starting characters. And I kind of commissioned this other piece, and somehow it made it in there that I wanted him to be 4.5 feet tall, based on like these old world building documents. And so then I get this miniature back and I compare it to the Elementalist. I'm like, oh, I have made a mistake. So we ended up having to do a completely new mold, or a completely new sculpt for the Cragheart, but I still have this little guy sitting on my desk with me as a reminder of that. So yeah, we got all that stuff done. And we launched the project. Or no, sorry. First, we went to Gen Con 2015 and showed it around to everybody. Most of the graphic design was done at this point. And basically, like anybody who would look at it, yeah, I showed it to them. And this is my crazy big dungeon crawl. Please love it. And so this is a drive-through review, a video that he shot back in 2015. Then I started making prototypes, sending those out to reviewers like Richard Ham, of course, and of course he loved it. Yeah, and basically, yeah, then we launched the project. And yeah, it did great. I will admit that I launched it probably a little bit too early, right? Like I really wanted to get it out that year. Obviously couldn't go past September. There were some things I hadn't fully figured out yet. Mostly having to do with like how big this box actually would be. If you can notice something wrong from this picture here, the volume ended up being like maybe 3 times what I thought it was going to be. I knew there was going to be like 50 plus scenarios in the game. I had like 15 characters designed at that point. But I hadn't figured out like exactly like how many punch boards I would need to actually accomplish that, like how big each of the character boxes would need to be to like store all the hundreds of cards in there. And yeah, so I don't know where I came up with these numbers, but I sold the Gloomhaven edition without with standees, without miniatures, for $64, and that included free shipping. I did not make money on those sales. And the $80 version with miniatures, I maybe made a little bit of money on that. So yeah, it was basically a wash. But I didn't know that at the time. At the time, I'd made $400,000. It was great. I was really excited. I'd sort of like found my community, right? Despite not having the King Killer IP, I'd found this 5,000 person audience, and we could grow from there, and we could make a real business out of this. Like I had succeeded in my goal, which was just like a really exciting, like really affirming feeling. And then, of course, we had to make Gloomhaven. So what exactly did I have at the time? Like I said, there was 15 characters that I designed. Most of the scenarios weren't designed at that point, and like I basically had like no writing done. And like I'm not a good writer, or I'm an okay writer, but like I don't enjoy writing. And as you know, there's a lot of text in Gloomhaven, and just like going through all that was a big slog. I had fun with it, but it was a lot of writing. It was a lot of writing. And yeah, so I had projected during the Kickstarter that it would take like 6 months to fulfill the project, which was crazy. Like I don't know where that number came from either. And so it ended up taking more like 18 months, and people got a little bit impatient with me, which is perfectly understandable. Like in hindsight, seeing the final box of Gloomhaven, the reaction is more like, holy shit, you did all of that in 2 years? Like, that's crazy, right? But at the time, it was like, it's been a year and a half. Like, where's my game? Yeah, like I said, it's totally understandable. But yeah, I was working like nonstop on this game. Here's a picture of me working in my office. And yeah, like 80 hours a week, just like just getting this done, because like I knew it needed to get done. Gen Con 2016 rolled around, and I was planning on having a game to sell at Gen Con. That didn't end up working out. But also, I was starting to get like a little bit nervous about money at that point. Sort of starting to have my costs realized, and like how big this game was, how much it was going to take to manufacture it, how much it was going to take to ship it. But luckily, I had this tiny booth at the back of the hall at Gen Con, and I didn't have anything to sell other than like some copies of Forge War that were still laying around. But Jamie Stegmaier sort of messaged me out of the blue. We were friends at this point, and he's like, I know you have a booth, and I know you don't have anything to sell. Scythe is coming out, and I have like a demo room, like in the hotel across the road, but I don't have a booth. Like, would you like to sell Scythe out of your booth? And I was like, yes, please. So that's what we did this Gen Con. I sold 1,000 copies of Scythe out of a tiny 10 by 10 booth in the back of the hall. I'm still proud of that accomplishment. And I sort of earned enough money doing that I was able to secure myself financially, that I was able to fulfill the project. So thank you, Jamie Stegmaier, for saving my company a second time. And then, Essen rolled around. I actually had a pre-production copy hand-delivered to me at Essen. So I was able to open that up and sort of kind of take a look at it at the same time other people were getting a first look at it. I sort of displayed all the contents out on the table. I was like, here it is, guys. This is what I've been working on. This is why it's been taking so long. This copy eventually, I actually didn't even get to hold on to this copy very long. I packed it up, gave it to Paul Grogan, who was going to do all the rules videos for it with gaming rules. So he started playing it. I think he got to start playing it before I started getting to play it. And he started raving to everybody who would listen that this was the greatest game of all time. Eventually, like, other advanced copies got sent out to other reviewers like Dice Tower and Drive Thru Review, and the buzz just started building about how crazy awesome this game was. Eventually copies started arriving to backers, like at the end of 2016, early 2017, and this buzz just started to build in this crazy way. So one of my core design principles I haven't really talked about too much so far was, it's kind of hard to explain. Like, I just really wanted this game to succeed, as we all do with anything we do. And the idea was that I really just wanted to make something that people couldn't ignore, right? Like, there's so many board games that in this hobby, just like they're hot for like a month, and then people forget about them. The same thing happened with Forge War. But like, I wanted something with staying power, like something that was going to be there and was going to be like in the conversation for like as long as possible, because it was just so ridiculous and so outlandish. It worked. Like, everybody was talking about this game and how crazy it was, and you just like see that box and you just have to know, like, what is in that box? Like, why is it so big? What is going on here? And so this was like nothing I could even describe, like what happened in like early 2017 when like the buzz just like turned into just a cacophony of just like everybody clamoring to like get a hold of a copy of this game. The thing was, right, I was only able to manufacture 10,000 copies. That's what I could afford to make. About 8,000 of those went to my backers and my pre-orders. And so I had 2,250 copies of this game going into retail. I went through a distribution broker, because I definitely didn't want to handle all that myself as like a single person company. And what he would do with all his games, he'd send out calls for orders, and he'd just get orders from distributors, and then he'd do like a percentage allocation. So like, if he got like twice as many orders for a game than he had copies of, then everybody would get just 50% of what they ordered. So for Gloomhaven, I had 2,250 copies, and he got 25,000 orders, um, which was about an 8% allocation. So if you were like a distributor, a small distributor, maybe you ordered 100 copies because you had 10 different retailers who wanted 10 copies each, you would get 8 copies and then have to decide which 8 of those retailers got a single copy to sell in their store. Needless to say, a lot of retailers and distributors were very mad at me. I got some angry emails. You just like you throw up your hands, like I'm sorry, I priced the game too low and couldn't manufacture more, but we got through it. Yeah, and so it even became like a joke of like how hard it was to get a copy. This was a no pun included video, where it was just like FCO wandering around, looking in bushes, looking through the grocery store, like trying to find a copy of Gloomhaven. It was very silly. So people often ask me, like, did you anticipate like how successful Gloomhaven would be? And the answer is like, of course not. Like, how could you? Like, the magnitude of the ridiculousness of this was, I knew I had a good game, right? I knew it was going to do better than Forge War. Obviously, like the Kickstarter did better than Forge War. But like, I knew it was a game that I loved, and that what I loved was not necessarily what everybody else in the hobby loved, right? Like, this was a game that I designed for myself, and it was intimidating, right? I mean, it is like a giant box, and it's full of chits that I didn't even give you bags to store. You had to figure out your own solution to store hundreds of these little chits. I probably like increased the market share of the board game insert industry like significantly with the release of this game. But yeah, like I knew it was an intimidating thing. It's a crunchy, like heavy, thinky thing that like not everybody is gonna love. Like I figured, this 10,000 audience that I'd found was kind of like was gonna be it. Like I was gonna sort of build my community out of that, and just to like see the swiftness with which like it rose up like the BGG rankings, and just like it really felt like every single person in the industry like wanted a copy of this game. There's no way you can anticipate that sort of thing. Like it's like a once in a million like lightning bolts of just like all the perfect confluence of all these different factors coming into just like making this game like the craziest thing I've ever experienced. So yeah, it became very obvious that we needed to do another printing. And there were a lot of ways to do that, but I figured the best way was just to go back to Kickstarter, right? And so we launched a second project, and it did even better, right? $4 million, which is an insane amount of money. It's just crazy. I mean, yes, technically it's not $4 million. I'm still a little miffed about that $205. But it's fine. We round up. Yeah, and this was really like, obviously, like another just like huge life-changing experience for me. The second Kickstarter, where like I was pricing things appropriately, and this was actually going to give me like financial stability to like build a company off of, and turn this into like a real business that could support my family, right? So my wife was able to go back to grad school, which she'd always wanted to do, and we eventually had a kid, and we got to move out to California, where the rest of my family lives, and yeah, we got to like hire employees. I hired Price Johnson, was my first hire. He's now the COO, just a vital part of the company. We now have 7 employees, and yeah, it's just been a great experience that kind of is facilitated by this amazing community that sort of just exploded out of that initial buzz for this game. And yeah, the amount of love that people have for this game, and how much it's meant for them in their life, has just like been really, really inspiring. So yeah, we were able to go on and make other things. We came out with Founders of Gloomhaven after that, which is this game that I love, even if not many other people do. We came out with Forgotten Circles. I was working on Frosthaven at the time and knew that was going to take a long time to finish, and so we wanted to, release at least a little bit more content for the game. And Marcel, who's always been like a great helper and good friend of mine, was able, had sort of created his own custom content. So I'm like, yeah, let's publish that. It ended up being a lot more complicated than that, but we figured it out. And then, of course, there's Frosthaven, which is a whole other talk in itself. That's crazy. We're not going to get into that. And then Jaws of the Lion, which is also just another amazing experience. Right? Having the capital to actually publish a game and not have to go through Kickstarter and put it directly into Target, which was just a huge monumental achievement for me and Price. And so this is a picture taken, I think this was taken on Father's Day, in the height of COVID. I didn't have a kid at the time, so I went and posed with my board game child. And so and I'm just gonna keep making cool shit as long as you guys want to buy it. I couldn't be happier with how this turned out. Being a game designer is the best job in the world. And I can't think of anything better, and I'm so lucky that I was able to make this happen for myself, and that was because of, like I said, this community, and I am just eternally grateful for that. And it's been, the last 10 years have been an absolutely wild ride, and yeah, that's my story. So thank you all. Yeah, thank you all, and have a great time at PAX. Enjoy some games, and if you have any questions, if you want to talk at all, I'll be at my booth. I think it's 2833 is the booth number for Cephalofair Games. Feel free to stop on by, say hi, or whatever you want to do, and have a great time. Thanks.